Picture this: you're strolling through the winding streets of an ancient city, the air thick with the scent of spices and the murmur of distant voices. But what you don't realize is that every step you take is being watched, not by cameras or drones, but by a network of hidden eyes and ears engineered centuries ago. These weren't just cities, they were fortresses of ingenuity, where every brick, every alley, every seemingly ordinary structure played a role in an elaborate system of surveillance. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 25 of history's most brilliant and often overlooked security systems, crafted by civilizations long gone, but whose cleverness still leaves us speechless. Think about the last time you walked past a security camera or tapped your fingerprint to unlock a door. We like to believe our modern world invented the art of watching and protecting, but the truth is far more fascinating. Thousands of years ago, from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the jungles of Mesoamerica, ancient engineers and rulers devised methods so sophisticated they'd put some of today's tech to shame. Hidden tunnels that allowed spies to move unseen, watchtowers disguised as temples, even acoustic tricks that amplified whispers across vast plazas. These weren't just random ideas. They were calculated, refined over generations, and proof that the need for security is as old as civilization itself. So why does this matter now? Because these ancient systems aren't just relics, they're mirrors. They show us how societies grappled with the same questions we face today. How do you protect a community without sacrificing its freedom? How do you outsmart threats when resources are limited? And perhaps most intriguing of all, what can we learn from these forgotten blueprints to rethink our own approach to safety? Over the next 25 revelations, you'll discover how walls could see, how shadows could speak, and how the past still has secrets to teach us. Ready to step into the shadows of history? Let's begin. Deep beneath the rocky landscapes of Cappadocia lies a marvel of ancient engineering, Derinkuyu, an entire city carved into the earth, stretching over 18 levels into the darkness. But this wasn't just a refuge from invaders or a shelter from the scorching sun. It was a carefully designed surveillance fortress where the walls themselves became weapons. The secret sound. Every corridor, every chamber, every twisting passage was shaped to carry even the faintest noise across staggering distances. A dropped tool, a hushed conversation, the scrape of a sandal against stone, all of it traveled like a ripple through water, reaching the ears of guards stationed in hidden alcoves. Archaeologists call it acoustic espionage, a system so precise it could pinpoint intruders long before they ever saw a defender. Imagine standing in one of these tunnels, convinced you're moving in silence, only for your every breath to echo through the labyrinth like a beacon. The builders of Derinkuyu didn't just dig blindly. They sculpted the rock to amplify specific frequencies, turning the earth itself into a listening device. Some passages narrow suddenly, funneling sound like a megaphone. Others curve in ways that distort noise, making it impossible to tell if footsteps are coming from ahead or behind. What's truly astonishing is how low-tech yet effective this system was. No electricity, no wires, just pure physics harnessed by human ingenuity. And it wasn't just about defense. These whispering walls also let residents communicate across vast distances without raising their voices, a covert network long before radios or code words. Today, modern researchers have tested Derinkuyu's acoustics and found that a single clap can travel nearly a mile through certain tunnels, clear as a bell. It makes you wonder, in a world without microphones, how many other ancient cities might have turned their very architecture into ears, High above the bustling ports of ancient Carthage, sunlight didn't just illuminate the city, it became a weapon. The Carthaginians mastered a surveillance technique so elegant, it turned the sky itself into a communication network. Across their towers and fortifications, they mounted enormous bronze mirrors, polished to a blinding shine. But these weren't for vanity or decoration. With precise alignment, a single mirror could catch the sun's rays and flash them like a beacon across miles of open sea or dense urban streets. A flicker here, a sustained glare there, each pattern held meaning, a silent language of light that could relay messages faster than any runner or drumbeat. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its speed, but its secrecy. To an outsider, the flashes might seem random, just sunlight dancing on metal. But to trained observers, they spelled out urgent warnings. Enemy ships sighted on the horizon, unauthorized vessels slipping into harbor, even riots erupting in distant districts. The mirrors acted like an ancient version of encrypted radio, transmitting information only those with the code could decipher. Historians believe some signals were so nuanced they could indicate the size of an approaching fleet or the direction of a threat, giving Carthage defenders critical time to prepare. The real genius lay in the mirror's simplicity. Unlike fire signals, which required constant fuel and attention, the mirrors needed only clear skies and human ingenuity. And because the light could be directed with pinpoint accuracy, it reduced the risk of false alarms. A flashing beam aimed at a specific watchtower left little room for confusion. Modern experiments have shown that under ideal conditions, these bronze reflectors could project light up to 30 miles, turning the entire city into a web of interconnected eyes. But perhaps the most striking lesson from Carthage's mirror network isn't just the technology, it's the psychology. The mere presence of those glinting mirrors created an aura of omniscience. Would-be invaders or rebels never knew if their movements had been spotted, if a flicker of light had already betrayed them. In that way, the mirrors weren't just tools of communication, they were instruments of fear, amplifying Carthage's reputation as a city where no stealth was possible. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective surveillance isn't about what you see, it's about what you make others believe you can see. While Carthage relied on flashing mirrors and Derinkuyu harnessed the power of sound, ancient Babylon took surveillance to the skies with feathers. Far from simple messengers, the pigeons of Babylon were the unsung heroes of a high-speed communication network that would make any modern spy envious. Picture this: perched atop towering ziggurats, handlers released these specially trained birds, their wings cutting through the Mesopotamian air faster than any human runner could hope to match. But speed wasn't their only advantage. Unlike fire signals or drumbeats that could be seen or heard for miles, a pigeon's flight was virtually invisible to enemies on the ground, slipping past borders and armies unnoticed. What made this system so revolutionary was its precision. Each bird was raised to recognize a specific watchtower or military outpost, homing in on its destination with uncanny accuracy. Historical records suggest some pigeons could cover over 100 miles in a single day, carrying tiny scrolls tucked into leg capsules, details about troop movements, approaching threats, or even coded warnings about traitors within the city walls. And because the birds flew at such heights, intercepting them was nearly impossible. Even if an enemy archer spotted one, hitting a fast-moving target against the glaring sun was like trying to shoot a shadow. The Babylonians didn't stop there. They bred pigeons for endurance, selecting birds that could fly longer distances without tiring, and trained them to return home even after being released from unfamiliar territory. Some accounts describe towers spaced just far enough apart that a pigeon could make the journey before exhaustion set in, creating a relay system that spanned the entire empire. Imagine a chain of feathered couriers, each handing off vital intelligence like a baton in a race against time. But the true brilliance lay in the pigeons' reliability. Unlike human messengers who could be bribed, waylaid, or simply fail to deliver, these birds operated on instinct. Rain or shine, war or peace, they flew straight and true. Modern experiments have shown that carrier pigeons retain their homing abilities even when released hundreds of miles from their roosts, a testament to the Babylonians' understanding of animal behavior long before the science of ethology existed. What's often overlooked is how this system shaped Babylon's reputation. The mere knowledge that the city had eyes in the sky, that a whisper of rebellion in a distant province could reach the king's ear before the plotters finished their meeting, created an atmosphere of constant vigilance. It wasn't just about the messages the pigeons carried, it was about the fear they inspired. In a world where information was power, Babylon's winged network turned the sky itself into a weapon, proving that sometimes the quietest surveillance is the most formidable. Hidden beneath the rose-red cliffs of Petra, where most visitors marvel at the towering facades carved into stone, lies a surveillance secret so subtle, it flowed literally underfoot. The Nabateans, master engineers of the desert, didn't just build aqueducts to bring water to their city, they weaponized the channels themselves. These weren't mere pipes, they were liquid tripwires, a network of stone veins that pulsed with information. Picture a guard crouched in a dim chamber, one hand pressed against the cool wall of a water channel, feeling the tremors of distant footsteps ripple through the current. A splash where there should be silence, a vibration out of rhythm, these were the whispers of intrusion, betraying movements no human eye could see. The system's elegance lay in its duality. To outsiders, the channels were just another feat of hydraulic engineering, a necessity for survival in the arid landscape. But the Nabateans designed them with deliberate irregularities, narrow bends, sudden drops, chambers with precisely calculated echoes that amplified disturbances in the water. A single footfall in a forbidden tunnel could send vibrations racing through the network like a pebble dropped into a still pond, alerting guards stationed at key listening posts. Some channels even branched into false dead ends, trapping intruders in labyrinthine passages where their splashing would betray their location. What made Petra's hydraulic surveillance so formidable was its invisibility. Unlike watchtowers or patrols, which could be avoided or outrun, the water channels were omnipresent and unsuspected. Modern archaeologists have tested replicas of these aqueducts and found that trained observers could detect disturbances from over 300 feet away, distinguishing between the natural flow of water and the telltale disruptions of human activity. The Nabateans likely trained their guards to interpret these vibrations like a language. A quick series of tremors might signal a group moving swiftly, while irregular, scattered pulses could indicate someone lost or searching for a way out. But the true stroke of genius was how the system exploited necessity. In a city where water was sacred, no one would question the presence of channels running through restricted areas. The very infrastructure that sustained life also guarded it, turning every sip from a public fountain into a reminder. Even the rivers here had ears. Today, as we walk through Petra's ruins, it's easy to miss the quiet cunning beneath our feet, the grooves where water once flowed, carrying secrets as surely as it carried life. The Nabateans understood something timeless. The best surveillance isn't just hidden, it's woven so deeply into the fabric of daily life that no one thinks to look for it. At the heart of Mesoamerica, where the Pyramid of the Sun casts its imposing shadow, Teotihuacan's rulers didn't just build monuments, they engineered an entire language of smoke. Imagine standing atop one of those towering temples, your eyes scanning the horizon as a plume of vibrant blue spirals into the sky. To the untrained observer, it might look like an ordinary fire. But to the sentinels of Teotihuacan, that color was a coded scream. Invaders approaching from the east. This wasn't just smoke, it was chemistry perfected over generations. By blending specific minerals, plants, and resins into their signal fires, the city's watchkeepers could produce a spectrum of hues, each with its own urgent meaning. Green signaled a natural disaster, perhaps floodwaters surging through the valley. Red meant rebellion brewing in a distant district. Yellow indicated the arrival of traders requiring economic surveillance. The system's brilliance lay in its immediacy. A single burst of colored smoke could alert the entire city in moments, long before messengers could sprint across its sprawling avenues. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of these signal stations, strategically placed on elevated platforms where winds would carry the smoke clearly. Some fires burned in concave stone basins designed to funnel the plumes upward, while others used layered fuels to sustain the color for critical minutes. The choice of materials was no accident. Certain pigments created thicker smoke visible for miles, while others burned cleaner for precise, short-range messages. What set Teotihuacan apart was the system's adaptability. Unlike rigid codes that could be cracked, the meanings of the colors shifted periodically, a rotating cipher known only to trusted sentinels. A shade that meant all clear one month might warn of famine the next. This fluidity made the system nearly immune to espionage. Even if an enemy learned today's code, tomorrow's would render that knowledge useless. But the true mastery wasn't just in the signals, it was in the silence. No drums, no shouts, just a silent ballet of colors dancing above the city. In a world where noise could mean panic, Teotihuacan's rulers understood the power of quiet vigilance. Modern experiments recreating these smoke signals found that certain mineral combinations remained visible even in daylight over 15 miles away, a testament to the precision of ancient science. Perhaps most striking is how this system shaped the city's psychology. Every citizen, from farmer to priest, knew those colors held meaning that the sky itself could turn against them if they strayed from order. It was surveillance woven into the air, a reminder that even in a metropolis of 200,000, no act went unseen. Today, as we piece together fragments of Teotihuacan's pigments and braziers, we're not just studying ancient technology, we're deciphering the heartbeat of a civilization that turned the wind into a watchman. The winding alleys of Knossos didn't just twist by accident. They were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Step into the Minoan capital, and you'd quickly find yourself trapped in a living puzzle where every corner looked identical, every passage seemed to double back on itself, and the very ground beneath your feet became a silent betrayer. This wasn't poor urban planning. It was a deliberate strategy to turn the city into a gauntlet of confusion, where invaders would waste precious time retracing their steps while hidden watchers tracked their every move. The genius of Knossos lay in its deceptive simplicity. To residents, the labyrinthine streets were second nature, a familiar web they navigated with ease. But outsiders, they'd stumble into dead ends disguised as thoroughfares, courtyards that opened into narrow choke points, and staircases leading nowhere, all while unseen sentries observed from slender slits in the walls. These weren't just gaps in the masonry, they were sightlines carefully angled to give guards panoramic views without revealing their positions. Archaeologists have found evidence of raised walkways hidden behind decorative facades, allowing patrols to glide above the chaos like ghosts. What made this system so effective was its adaptability. Unlike static walls or moats, Knossos streets could be subtly altered. A movable barrier here, a temporary blockage there. Small changes could reroute intruders into prearranged kill zones or trap them in cul-de-sacs where they'd be effortlessly surrounded. Modern simulations show that even trained soldiers, dropped into a replica of Knossos' layout, took 3 times longer to reach key landmarks than in conventional city designs. The Minoans understood something profound. Confusion is a sharper weapon than any blade, but the real stroke of brilliance was how Knossos weaponized memory. The human brain instinctively seeks patterns, and the city's design exploited that flawlessly. Just when you thought you'd cracked the logic, perhaps noticing that doorways with blue trim led to main avenues, you'd encounter a cluster of blue-trimmed doors that opened into blank walls. This calculated unpredictability eroded invaders' confidence, making them hesitate at every turn. And hesitation in a city where every second counted was fatal. Perhaps most striking is how Knossos' legacy endures. Today, urban planners study its layout to design spaces that deter crime through natural surveillance, proof that the Minoans' understanding of human behavior was millennia ahead of its time. Walking through the ruins now, you can almost feel the eyes of the past still watching, a reminder that the best surveillance doesn't always need technology. Sometimes all it takes is a maze and the patience to let your enemies lose themselves. Along the Silk Road, where the whisper of shifting sands could mask approaching danger, the cities of ancient China turned sound into a shield. High atop watchtowers and gatehouses, bronze bells hung like silent sentinels, each precisely tuned to carry across the arid plains. But these weren't temple ornaments or musical instruments. They formed a sprawling auditory net, a defensive web strung across hundreds of miles. When bandits or raiders were spotted, guards wouldn't light signal fires or dispatch riders. Instead, they'd strike the nearest bell once, twice, a coded sequence that would ripple from settlement to settlement, traveling faster than any horse's hooves could gallop. The brilliance of this system lay in its simplicity and precision. Each bell's tone was unique, allowing trained listeners to identify which stretch of the Silk Road was under threat just by the sound. A deep, resonant toll might signal danger from the western deserts, while a higher-pitched chime indicated trouble near the mountain passes. Some accounts describe towers spaced exactly 5 li apart, close enough that the sound could leap clearly from one to the next without distortion. Archaeologists have found remnants of these bells with interiors carefully scored to enhance specific harmonics, proving they were engineered for range and clarity, not just ritual. What made the network truly formidable was its adaptability. In peacetime, the bells marked the hours or celebrated festivals, blending seamlessly into daily life. But when danger loomed, the same instruments became a weapon of information. Guards along the route memorized complex patterns. 3 rapid strikes followed by 2 slow ones might mean armed riders approaching, while a continuous, frantic pealing signaled an immediate lockdown. This duality ensured the system remained unobtrusive until the moment it was needed most. Modern acoustic studies have revealed just how far these bells could project. In the dry, still air of the Taklamakan Desert, tests with replica bronze bells showed their tones could carry up to 8 miles under ideal conditions, with low frequencies traveling farthest. That's nearly twice the range of a human shout, and without the exhaustion or delay of relay runners. The ancients didn't just rely on raw volume, though. They positioned the bells to exploit natural sound channels, like valleys that funneled noise or rock formations that reflected it. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect was the psychological warfare embedded in the system. Bandits hearing those distant, ominous chimes knew their element of surprise was gone, that every town ahead was already sealing its gates and readying defenses. The bells didn't just convey information, they sapped morale, turning would-be raiders into frustrated spectators. Today, as we uncover more of these ancient warning networks, we're left with a humbling realization. Long before fiber optics or radio waves, humanity had already mastered the art of instant communication. The Silk Road's bronze bells didn't just ring, they spoke the language of survival. Standing in the shadow of an Egyptian obelisk, you wouldn't just feel the cool respite from the desert sun, you'd be stepping into an ancient surveillance grid. The towering monuments of Thebes weren't merely symbols of power or celestial calendars, they functioned as the world's first shadow-based security system. Picture this: as the sun arced across the sky, the obelisk's elongated shadows swept across temple courtyards like the hands of a colossal clock. But instead of marking hours, these shifting patterns revealed intruders. A figure lingering too long near a treasury vault would disrupt the expected play of light and dark, their silhouette breaking the geometric perfection guards memorized down to the inch. The system's elegance lay in its invisibility. To the untrained eye, the obelisks were sacred art, their shadows a natural phenomenon. But to the temple sentinels stationed on high platforms, those shadows became a live map of movement. The precision was staggering. Historical records describe guards trained to recognize deviations as subtle as a shadow lengthening half a finger's width out of sequence. Some obelisks were even positioned to cast intersecting shadows at key times, creating temporary, dead zones where any movement stood out starkly against the expected crisscross pattern. Archaeologists have discovered that certain sundial platforms near Thebes' treasure houses were engraved with intricate grids, suggesting guards logged typical shadow positions throughout the day. Any variance from these records triggered immediate scrutiny. Modern experiments reconstructing these systems found that a person moving against the shadow flow could be detected nearly 200 feet away without making a sound. The obelisks essentially turned sunlight into a spotlight, their slow dance across the ground making stealth nearly impossible during daylight hours. But the real innovation was adaptability. Unlike static traps or walls, the shadow clocks evolved with the sun. An intruder who studied the patterns at dawn would find them useless by noon. Guards reportedly rotated shifts to maintain fresh eyes, as fatigue could dull one's perception of these subtle changes. Some temple complexes arranged multiple obelisks to create overlapping shadow zones, ensuring no single point was ever left unwatched for long. Perhaps most fascinating is how the system exploited human psychology. In a culture that revered celestial precision, abnormal shadows carried supernatural weight. Would-be thieves weren't just avoiding guards, they were fighting the gods themselves. This psychological layer made the shadow clocks doubly effective. Even those who didn't understand the system feared disturbing its harmony. Today, as laser grids and motion sensors dominate security tech, Egypt's obelisks stand as a reminder. Sometimes the oldest solutions cast the longest shadows. Flames erupting on a distant mountain peak might seem like a disaster to most, but for the Mycenaeans it was a language. Perched atop the rugged highlands of ancient Greece, a chain of beacons stood ready to turn fire into information, capable of relaying messages across the Peloponnese faster than a galloping horse could run. This wasn't just about warning of invasion. It was a meticulously timed system where the placement, duration, and even color of flames carried precise meaning. A short burst of orange flame might signal approaching ships, while a sustained green-tinged fire could indicate an army marching from the north. The speed was staggering. A message could leap from Mycenae to Athens in under 30 minutes, a distance that would take runners days to cover. The brilliance of this network lay in its simplicity and redundancy. Each beacon station was positioned within clear sight of the next, often atop natural elevations or fortified towers, ensuring no link in the chain was vulnerable to a single point of failure. Guards at these outposts didn't just light fires, they maintained stacks of pre-prepared fuel bundles. each treated with different salts or metals to produce distinct hues when burned. Historical accounts describe clay tablets found at Mycenaean sites listing combinations like cedar with copper for blue or olive wood with sulfur for yellow, effectively serving as ancient encryption keys. Modern experiments recreating these beacon fires have shown that certain chemical treatments could produce visible flames from over 20 miles away under clear conditions. But the Mycenaeans didn't stop at visual signals. They engineered their beacon stations with acoustic traps, deep pits dug beside the fire platforms to amplify the sound of bronze gongs. When fog or rain obscured visibility, guards would strike these gongs in synchronized patterns, turning the mountains themselves into resonating drums. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that some stations used a system of reflective stones to bounce the sound farther down the chain, creating a hybrid of light and sound that could adapt to any weather. What's often overlooked is how this system shaped Mycenaean military strategy. Unlike static defenses that reacted to threats, the beacons allowed for proactive maneuvers. A signal from the coast could mobilize troops before an enemy fleet even made landfall, or redirect supply caravans away from ambush points. The psychological impact was equally profound. Knowing that fire could outrun any spy or saboteur created an aura of inevitability around Mycenae's defenses. Even Homer's Iliad hints at this, with Agamemnon's chain of fire serving as a metaphor for unstoppable communication. The legacy of these beacons outlasted the Mycenaeans themselves. Centuries later, the Romans would adopt and refine the system for their own lighthouses and border forts, while medieval empires used similar networks during wartime. Yet none matched the Mycenaean sophistication in blending chemistry, acoustics, and sheer geographic cunning. Standing atop one of these ancient beacon sites today, you can almost hear the ghostly echo of gongs and see the spectral glow of flames, a reminder that long before satellites or fiber optics, humanity had already mastered the art of turning landscapes into living, breathing networks of light. High in the mist-shrouded Andes, Machu Picchu's stone terraces cling to the mountainside like a secret whispered between earth and sky. But what most visitors don't realize is that these breathtaking vistas served a far more practical purpose. They were the perfect camouflage for an invisible army of watchers. The Incas didn't just build a city here, they engineered a surveillance masterpiece where every overlook, every winding staircase, every seemingly decorative ledge was a calculated vantage point. Hidden among the ruins, you'll find unassuming stone platforms jutting slightly from the walls, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of silent sentinels. These weren't accidental protrusions, they were purpose-built perches, angled to give guards a panoramic view of the entire city, while keeping them virtually undetectable from below. The genius of these hidden lookouts lay in their integration. Unlike traditional watchtowers that announced their presence, the Inca platforms mimicked natural rock formations, blending seamlessly into the terraced landscape. Guards stationed here could monitor grain stores, observe ritual ceremonies, or track movements along the intricate network of staircases, all without casting a shadow or disturbing the sacred harmony of the site. Archaeologists have mapped sight lines from these platforms and discovered they offer overlapping fields of vision, creating a web of observation so thorough that no corner of Machu Picchu went unwatched. Modern recreations show that a single sentinel could spot a figure moving near the Temple of the Sun nearly a quarter mile away, yet remain invisible thanks to strategic shadow placement and the platform's muted stone tones. What made this system extraordinary was its psychological dimension. The Incas understood that the most effective surveillance thrives on uncertainty. Citizens and visitors alike would have sensed they were being watched, spotting a guard occasionally shifting position on a distant ledge, but never knew exactly how many eyes were upon them or from which direction. This pervasive but intangible presence fostered self-regulation, a phenomenon modern security experts call the panopticon effect. The hidden lookouts weren't just physical structures, they were instruments of social control, woven into the spiritual fabric of a culture that revered the mountain gods as eternal witnesses. Recent laser scans of Machu Picchu have revealed even more sophistication. Some platforms feature subtle acoustic enhancements, curved walls that funneled sounds upward from the city below, allowing guards to eavesdrop on conversations 30 feet downslope. Others were positioned to catch the first light of dawn, illuminating specific pathways at sunrise to reveal nighttime intruders' footprints. The Incas even accounted for seasonal changes. Winter platforms were slightly recessed to shield watchers from harsh winds, while summer posts captured cooling breezes to make extended vigils bearable. Perhaps the most striking lesson from Machu Picchu's surveillance isn't technological but philosophical. In a civilization without writing, where knotted quipu cords recorded information, the Incas mastered the art of silent observation. Their lookouts required no spoken commands, no written logs, just an intimate knowledge of stone and sightlines passed down through generations. Today, as tourists traverse the same steps once monitored by invisible eyes, they're walking through a living testament to an ancient truth. Sometimes the most powerful watchmen are the ones you never see. At the heart of the Yucatan jungle, where the pyramid of Kukulkan pierces the emerald canopy, sound didn't just travel, it obeyed. The Mayans of Chichen Itza didn't merely build towering temples. They engineered acoustic marvels so precise, a clap of hands at the base could ripple upward as the chirp of a sacred quetzal bird by the time it reached the summit. But this sonic sorcery wasn't for spectacle alone. Hidden within the stepped limestone walls lay an ancient surveillance trick. Whispers from the plaza below would climb the pyramid's flanks like invisible vines, reaching the ears of priests and guards stationed high above with eerie clarity. The secret lay in the angles. Each of the pyramid's 4 staircases was built at exactly 45 degrees, their surfaces polished smooth to reflect sound waves upward rather than scattering them. Even more astonishing were the terraces. While they appeared evenly spaced to the eye, subtle variations in their height created a series of acoustic filters. Low-frequency noises like footsteps or rustling fabric were dampened, while higher-pitched sounds, a hissed conversation, the slide of a blade from its sheath were amplified as they ascended. Modern acoustic engineers who have studied the site describe it as a natural sound lens, focusing specific frequencies with the precision of a laser. What made this system truly revolutionary was its selectivity. During crowded ceremonies, the roar of thousands would dissolve into a harmless hum at the summit. But a single voice speaking at a particular pitch, it could cut through the chaos like a knife. Archaeologists have discovered that certain spots on the plaza's stone flooring, when struck lightly, produce echoes that bounce between the pyramid's corners in deliberate patterns, likely markers where informants or guards would stand to monitor conversations. A word uttered near the serpent head sculptures at the base, for instance, travels upward along the northern staircase with almost supernatural crispness. The psychological impact was profound. Imagine being a visitor to Chichen Itza, aware that any careless word might be plucked from the air by unseen watchers 90 feet above. This wasn't just architecture, it was theater designed to reinforce the priest's divine authority. Recent experiments using binaural microphones revealed that from the temple summit, a whisper at the pyramid's base sounds as clear as someone speaking 3 feet away, a trick that would have made even the most discreet conspirators think twice. But the Mayans didn't stop there. they weaponized nature itself. On the spring equinox, when the setting sun casts undulating shadows down the pyramid stairs to create the illusion of a slithering serpent, the acoustics shift dramatically. The same stones that reflect sound upward all year suddenly channel noises horizontally, allowing surveillance across the entire Great Plaza. It's as if the pyramid itself awakened for one night, its ears turning outward to listen. The legacy of these echo chambers endures in unexpected ways. Modern stadium designers now study Chichen Itza's acoustics to improve sound distribution, while covert operations specialists cite it as history's earliest known example of directional audio surveillance. Yet perhaps its most enduring lesson is about perception. The Mayans understood that true power lies not just in hearing secrets, but in making people believe every whisper finds its way to the gods' ears. In that sense, Kukulkan's pyramid wasn't just a temple or a watchtower. It was the world's first psychological surveillance system, proving that sometimes the most effective way to control behavior is to let sound itself become the warden. When darkness fell over Nineveh, the Assyrians didn't just rely on torches or watchmen to guard their sprawling capital. They enlisted creatures with senses far sharper than any humans. Picture the moonlit walls of the ancient city, silent except for the padding of paws and the occasional rustle of fur. These weren't stray scavengers, they were highly trained sentinels, a specialized corps of dogs bred and conditioned to become the empire's most reliable nocturnal guardians. But these animals were more than simple alarms. They were precision instruments, their barks fine-tuned into a complex vocabulary of threat assessment. A short, sharp series of yaps might signal a lone infiltrator scaling the walls, while a sustained, guttural growl could mean armed forces gathering beyond the gates. The Assyrians didn't leave this system to chance. Historical reliefs from Nineveh's ruins depict handlers working with specific breeds, likely ancestors of the modern mastiff, selected for their size, intelligence, and territorial instincts. Training methods were meticulous. Puppies were raised in rotating guard posts to imprint the scent and sound of each section of the city's perimeter. By adulthood, these dogs could distinguish between the footfall of a returning merchant and the hesitant steps of an intruder. Some accounts suggest they were even trained to recognize the metallic tang of concealed weapons, reacting more aggressively to those carrying hidden blades. What set this system apart was its layered intelligence. The dogs didn't just bark at every disturbance, they were conditioned to respond differently based on the threat level. A low, rumbling woof might alert nearby handlers to investigate quietly, while a frenzied chorus would trigger full mobilization of the wall's defenders. Modern canine behaviorists analyzing ancient Assyrian texts believe the dogs were taught to modulate their vocalizations based on the direction and distance of perceived threats, creating an auditory map for their human counterparts. Excavations have uncovered bronze whistles near Nineveh's gatehouses, likely used by handlers to issue silent commands or redirect the dog's attention. The psychological impact was as calculated as the training. Would-be infiltrators hearing those methodical barks in the dark couldn't know if the next sound would be the scrape of claws on stone or the hot breath of a predator at their heels. Assyrian records boast that entire enemy scouting parties retreated simply from hearing the coordinated response of the wall dogs, a ripple of barks passing down the fortifications like a morbid game of telephone. But perhaps the most fascinating detail lies in the dogs' post-service lives. Unlike war dogs of later eras, Nineveh's guardians were often retired to temple complexes, where they lived as honored protectors until old age. Skeletal remains found near ziggurats show signs of careful burial, some with worn teeth suggesting they were fed specially softened food in their later years. This wasn't just sentimentality, It reflected a profound understanding that loyalty, once earned, deserved reciprocation. Today, as military and police units worldwide continue to rely on working dogs, they're walking in paw prints that stretch back nearly 3 millennia. The Assyrians grasped something timeless. Sometimes the most advanced surveillance technology isn't a gadget or a system, but a living, breathing partner with ears that hear what ours cannot and a voice that speaks in warnings we've learned to decode. Beneath the marble splendor of Persepolis, where ambassadors and nobles walked under the watchful eyes of stone griffins, another set of eyes moved unseen. The Persian Empire's crowning jewel wasn't just a palace, it was a labyrinth of secrets, its foundations threaded with narrow tunnels that twisted like veins beneath the throne room. These weren't escape routes or storage corridors. They were the empire's living nervous system, a covert highway for spies and informants to monitor every whispered conspiracy, every furtive glance exchanged in the halls above. The system's brilliance lay in its architectural deception. While visitors marveled at the soaring columns and gilded ceilings, few noticed the subtle vents disguised as decorative flourishes, small openings where sound carried downward with eerie clarity. A governor complaining about taxes near the Hall of 100 Columns might not see the scribe crouched below, etching his words onto a wax tablet. The tunnels themselves were engineering marvels, their walls lined with a mixture of clay and horsehair to absorb the spy's footsteps while amplifying voices from above. Modern acoustic tests have shown that conversations held near certain pillars in the Apadana could be heard over 30 feet below with near-perfect clarity, as if the stone itself were whispering secrets to those who knew how to listen. But Persepolis' surveillance network didn't stop at eavesdropping. Some passages terminated in cleverly disguised peepholes, thin alabaster panels that appeared solid from the palace side, but became semi-transparent when backlit by torchlight in the tunnels. These windows allowed observers to watch court ceremonies or private meetings without casting shadows or raising suspicion. Archaeologists have identified at least 14 such viewing points positioned near key decision-making spaces, suggesting the Persian rulers valued visual confirmation alongside auditory intelligence. The true stroke of genius, however, was the tunnel system's psychological impact. Unlike overt guards or obvious watchposts, these hidden corridors cultivated an atmosphere of omniscience. Nobles never knew if a stray comment might reach the great king's ears before they'd even left the room. This uncertainty became its own deterrent. When you can't identify the watchers, you start policing your own words. Historical records hint at how effectively this worked. Greek diplomats wrote of Persian officials who'd suddenly pause mid-sentence in seemingly empty rooms, as if remembering the walls themselves had ears. What's often overlooked is how the tunnels doubled as a rapid response network. Narrow side passages connected directly to barracks and guard chambers, allowing armed reinforcements to emerge from seemingly solid walls during uprisings or assassination attempts. One recently discovered shaft runs straight from the treasury to a hidden exit beyond the city walls, suggesting that in times of crisis, the empire's wealth could be stealthily evacuated while invaders ransacked an already empty vault above. The legacy of Persepolis' secret passages endures in unexpected ways. Modern courthouses and government buildings still use acoustic tricks to enhance security, while the principle of invisible surveillance shapes everything from digital monitoring to undercover policing. Standing among the ruins today, it's easy to miss the small, square openings in the stone, but each one is a reminder that history's most powerful rulers understood a fundamental truth. Knowledge flows not just from what you see, but from what remains unseen. Stretching across the jagged spine of the Great Wall like beads on an invisible thread, the Han Dynasty's signal towers were more than just stone sentinels. They were the nervous system of an empire. Each tower, spaced precisely 1,000 paces apart, formed a chain of communication so swift, a message could race from the western deserts to the imperial capital in under a day. But this wasn't just about speed, it was about language. By day, colored flags fluttered in precise formations, their patterns encoding everything from troop movements to weather warnings. A red flag tilted northeast might signal a nomadic raid, while a yellow banner crossed with black could indicate a supply caravan in distress. At night, the towers transformed into fiery lighthouses, with different combinations of flames conveying urgency: 3 fires for an imminent attack, 2 for suspicious movements, 1 for all clear. The real genius lay in the system's adaptability. Unlike static codes that enemies could decipher, the Han commanders rotated signal meanings seasonally, with new cipher books distributed to tower garrisons under heavy guard. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of these manuals, revealing astonishing complexity. Some flag sequences accounted for variables like wind direction or time of day, adjusting interpretations based on context. A blue flag at dawn might request reinforcements, while the same flag at dusk could warn of poisoned wells. Drumbeats added another layer. Rapid, staccato rhythms could override visual signals during sandstorms or fog, with specific cadences corresponding to prearranged messages. Modern recreations show these drums could be heard up to 4 miles away in optimal conditions, their deep vibrations cutting through howling winds. But the towers weren't just relay stations, they were intelligence hubs. Each garrison kept detailed logs of passing traffic, noting trader caravans, diplomatic envoys, and even migratory animal patterns that might mask enemy movements. Excavations at tower sites have uncovered stacks of wooden slips recording everything from the number of horses spotted to unusual bird flights that often preceded human activity. The Han understood that surveillance wasn't just watching for threats, it was reading the landscape like a living document. The psychological impact was profound. For Silk Road travelers, the ever-present towers were a constant reminder of the Empire's reach, a silent promise that no act, however remote, went unnoticed. Rebel groups reportedly avoided routes within sight of the towers, knowing their plans could be telegraphed to the capital before they'd finished breaking camp. Even the tower's architecture played mind games. Their staggered placement created optical illusions, making it seem like more towers existed than there actually were. What's often overlooked is how the system mirrored the Han's bureaucratic brilliance. Just as the towers passed messages seamlessly across physical space, the imperial courier system mirrored this efficiency in governance, with paperwork and decrees moving as swiftly as battle warnings. Today, as satellite networks and fiber optics span the globe, we're still chasing the Han Dynasty's vision, a world where information defies distance and every whisper on the frontier finds its way to the throne. On the Capitoline Hill, where Rome's most sacred temple stood, the city's last line of defense wasn't armored soldiers or spiked barricades, it was a flock of seemingly ordinary geese. While legend remembers them as accidental heroes who honked at invading Gauls in the dead of night, these birds were far from random. They were the feathery cornerstone of an elaborate nocturnal surveillance system, bred and trained to detect threats no human guard could perceive. Unlike dogs that might sleep through stealthy footsteps or dozing sentinels vulnerable to ambush, geese possess an extraordinary sensitivity to low-frequency vibrations in the air, the kind produced by even the most careful intruder creeping through darkness. The Romans didn't just keep these geese as living alarms, they engineered their environment for maximum effectiveness. The sacred flock lived in a purpose-built stone enclosure near the Temple of Juno, its floor slightly inclined to amplify the birds' restless movements. When geese sensed danger, their instinct wasn't just to honk. It was to cluster toward the highest point, creating a cascading chorus that grew louder as more birds joined. Archaeologists have found evidence that the enclosure's walls were lined with thin bronze sheets to reflect and magnify the sound, turning what might have been scattered noise into an unmistakable siren. What set this system apart was its fail-safes. While one group of geese guarded the treasury, another flock monitored the approach to the Senate House, each with distinct honking patterns that veteran guards could distinguish like dialects. Historical records describe how handlers would occasionally test the system by having soldiers attempt stealthy approaches. The geese consistently detected intruders at 3 times the distance human sentries could. Modern ornithologists confirm that geese can hear frequencies as low as 0.1 Hz, allowing them to sense the subsonic vibrations of massing troops long before any visible or audible signs emerged. The psychological warfare was equally brilliant. After the famous Gallic attack, Rome's leaders deliberately propagated the story of the geese's accidental heroism, encouraging enemies to underestimate their ongoing military use. For centuries afterward, the sacred flock was maintained not just as ceremonial relics but as active defenders, their nighttime patrols supplemented by strategically placed water troughs that forced would-be infiltrators to cross liquid barriers, a surface that magnified vibrations straight to the geese's sensitive feet. Perhaps the most fascinating detail lies in the bird's training. Temple inscriptions suggest handlers used specific scents to heighten the geese's alertness during high-risk periods, rubbing pungent herbs on the enclosure walls that triggered the bird's natural defensiveness. During festivals or diplomatic visits when extra noise would be problematic, the geese were temporarily relocated to soundproofed pits beneath the temple's proof that the Romans understood how to toggle their surveillance on and off as needed. Today, as airports and military bases experiment with avian detection systems, they're unknowingly echoing a 2,000-year-old innovation. The geese of Rome weren't just lucky animals in the right place at the right time. They were feathery pieces in an ancient security puzzle, proving that sometimes the best watchmen don't wear armor, they wear plumage. Among the towering spires of Angkor Wat, where stone serpents coil around every archway, the air itself became a sentinel. The Khmer engineers didn't just build temples, they composed symphonies of security, hanging delicate-looking metal chimes along pathways and corridors where their music held a hidden purpose. To visitors, these tinkling ornaments seemed like spiritual decorations, their melodies blending with the rustle of jungle leaves. But step too close to a restricted area, and the breeze you created would send the chimes clanging in a discordant pattern, a deliberate alarm disguised as wind song. The system's sophistication lay in its deceptive simplicity. Each chime was tuned to a precise pitch, with clusters arranged to create harmonic dissonance when disturbed by human movement rather than natural wind. Guards stationed in hidden alcoves memorized these acoustic fingerprints. A sudden C-sharp followed by 2 rapid E-flats meant someone was approaching the eastern granaries, while a drawn-out G minor chord signaled movement near the royal quarters. Modern acousticians studying replica chimes have found that the Khmer artisans weighted some with tiny lead pellets to alter their swing, creating irregular rhythms that stood out against background noise. What made this surveillance so effective was its invisibility. Unlike clanging bells or shouted warnings that would startle intruders into fleeing, the chimes' alerts sounded accidental, like a gust had caught them. This gave guards precious seconds to observe trespassers before they realized they'd been detected. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that some pathways were deliberately narrowed to funnel air currents, ensuring even the most cautious footstep would disturb the chimes. Others were positioned near stone walls that acted as natural amplifiers, bouncing the sound toward guard posts while masking its origin. the psychological dimension was equally ingenious. In a culture that revered the natural world, the ever-present chimes blurred the line between spiritual harmony and security. A thief hearing the sudden discord might hesitate, wondering if the gods themselves had marked his presence. Temple inscriptions hint that certain high-ranking officials carried small fans to gently redirect airflow, allowing them to move undetected, an ancient form of security clearance encoded in mundane objects. But the true masterpiece was the chime's adaptability. During monsoon season, when winds roared, guards switched to monitoring lower-pitched chimes hung in sheltered alcoves, their deeper tones cutting through the storm's howl. Dry season arrangements used lighter alloys that responded to faint breezes, catching the barest whisper of movement. Recent laser scans of Angkor's gateways reveal subtle grooves where chimes could be rapidly repositioned, suggesting the system evolved with shifting security needs. Standing in the ruins today, you can still find fragments of these ancient sentinels, oxidized metal slivers clinging to broken archways. They're quiet now, but if you close your eyes and let the Cambodian wind rush through the stones, you might just hear the ghost of their song, a reminder that sometimes the best watchmen don't stand guard at all. They dance on the air, turning every breath of wind into a whisper of warning. Beneath the gilded domes of Constantinople, where emperors walked on surfaces more intricate than most tapestries, the city's mosaic floors held secrets in plain sight. These weren't just decorative masterpieces, they were Byzantine security blueprints, their swirling patterns encoding safe passages and restricted zones with geometric precision. Imagine stepping into the great palace's reception hall, where the marble underfoot depicted a lush garden seen to visiting dignitaries. But to imperial guards, that same mosaic was a live map, a single misplaced red tessera near the peacock motif, signaling that someone had crossed into forbidden territory without proper clearance. The system's sophistication lay in its dual nature. To the untrained eye, these were simply beautiful floors, their biblical scenes and geometric borders serving aesthetic or spiritual purposes. But beneath the artistry lay a meticulous code. Certain color transitions marked patrol routes for the Varangian Guard, while specific arrangements of gold tiles indicated which corridors were acoustically monitored. Archaeologists have discovered that some mosaics incorporated subtle raised edges along critical paths imperceptible to visitors but detectable by sandaled feet, allowing authorized personnel to navigate complex buildings in complete darkness during emergencies. Modern conservators using spectral imaging have identified over 24 distinct alert patterns across surviving fragments, from zigzag borders that warned of unstable flooring to circular motifs that marked ideal listening posts where whispers carried upward through ventilation shafts. What made this approach revolutionary was its passive effectiveness. Unlike guards or barriers that could be avoided or corrupted, the mosaics were immutable and ever-present. A spy might bribe a human sentry, but he couldn't bribe a floor tile. The Byzantines took this further by rotating the meanings of certain patterns monthly, with codebooks kept in the imperial archives. A chevron design that signaled restricted area in spring might simply denote a servant's passage by summer, keeping potential infiltrators perpetually off balance. The psychological impact was profound, knowing that every step might be tracked by unseen observers, that even the ground beneath your feet could betray you, created an atmosphere of pervasive watchfulness. Historical accounts describe foreign envoys being deliberately led across alert mosaics during negotiations, their nervous glances at the floor subtly revealing their awareness of the system and, by extension, their prior intelligence-gathering efforts. Recent excavations near the old imperial docks have uncovered some of the most ingenious applications. Here, mosaic wave patterns concealed tidal markers when seawater seepage reached certain tiles during high tide, Guards knew which underground passages would flood, allowing them to trap smugglers in dead-end tunnels. Other harbor mosaics used carefully placed mother-of-pearl fragments to reflect moonlight in prearranged sequences, creating covert signals readable from ships in the Golden Horn. Perhaps the most striking discovery came from a 6th century church mosaic near the old Senate House. At first glance, it depicts standard Christian iconography, but when sunlight hits at a 45-degree angle as it did during morning prayers, hidden patterns emerge. Interlocking crosses form arrows pointing to concealed doors, while the eyes of saintly figures align with peepholes in the walls. This wasn't just art, it was a security schematic disguised as devotion, proving the Byzantines understood that the best surveillance systems don't announce themselves, they wait patiently for the light to reveal their truths. Today, as preservationists painstakingly restore these ancient floors, they're not just uncovering lost artistry, they're deciphering the operational manual of an empire that turned beauty into a weapon. Each tiny tessera they uncover whispers the same lesson. Sometimes the most powerful watchdogs don't bark. They lie silent underfoot, waiting for someone to misstep. In the shadowed alleys of Edo, where paper lanterns cast flickering light on wooden shutters, an unlikely army moved through the night, not with swords but with buckets and ladles. The night soil collectors of feudal Japan were far more than sanitation workers. They were the shogunate's most pervasive intelligence network, their unsung role woven into the very fabric of the city's survival. Every household in Edo, from the humblest tea shop to the grandest samurai estate, had to dispose of waste, and that universal need became the perfect cover for surveillance. As collectors gathered their malodorous cargo, they also gathered whispers, whose rice stores were dwindling, which merchants received strange visitors after dark, even which families suddenly burned more fuel than their status should allow, all clues to rebellion, corruption, or foreign influence. The system's brilliance lay in its invisibility. To residents, the collectors were just part of the urban rhythm, as unremarkable as the sunrise. But the shogun's magistrates paid these kumatori in silver and secrecy, training them to notice anomalies most would overlook. A sudden increase in waste from a tofu shop might reveal hidden mouths to feed, suggesting a clandestine meeting place. Unusually clean privies in a normally bustling household could hint at recent absences, perhaps for plotting. Even the composition of waste told stories. Traces of rare medicines or luxury foods betrayed illicit wealth or alliances. Modern historians examining Edo period ledgers have found coded entries where collectors logged such details alongside their deliveries, their reports as meticulously organized as any spy's dossier. What made this network so formidable was its omniscience. Unlike guards or inspectors who triggered deference, the night soil workers moved through all levels of society unnoticed. Samurai dismissed them, merchants barely registered their presence, and yet they penetrated inner courtyards even the shogun's spies couldn't access without suspicion. Their carts became rolling listening posts, the rhythmic sloshing of waste masking quiet conversations with servants or apprentices eager to trade gossip for an extra coin. Some collectors developed reputations as confidants, their monthly visits offering a safe outlet for grievances, information the magistrates later used to pinpoint discontent before it became revolt. The psychological impact was subtle but profound. Knowing that even one's waste could become evidence created a low-grade paranoia, a sense that no act was truly private. This was surveillance by necessity, leveraging a function everyone relied on but no one wished to discuss. The shogunate took pains to reinforce the collectors' perceived low status, even as they quietly elevated their most observant agents to comfortable retirements. Records show one particularly sharp-eyed collector who uncovered a ring of smugglers by noting inconsistencies in fish bones and seaweed disposal, a feat rewarded with a riverfront home far from the stench he'd spent decades navigating. Perhaps the most striking legacy of Edo's night soil spies is how their methods echo today. Modern waste analysis still tracks everything from drug use to dietary trends, and urban planners study Edo's system as an early example of leveraging municipal services for security. But there's a deeper lesson here. True surveillance mastery isn't about force or flashy technology. It's about understanding the routines people can't avoid and turning those daily necessities into silent witnesses. The collectors of Edo didn't just carry away the city's waste, they carried its secrets, proving that sometimes the most powerful intelligence operations don't hide in shadows. They come to your doorstep, bucket in hand, smiling like servants while remembering everything. High above the labyrinthine canals of Venice, where sunlight danced on the water and shadows stretched between palazzos, an unassuming rooftop structure held the key to the city's most covert surveillance operation. The Venetian pigeon lofts weren't just birdhouses, they were the nerve centers of a feathery intelligence network so precise, it could trace a suspect's path across the city without a single human tail. While other empires relied on pigeons as messengers, Venice's handlers trained their birds to become living maps, conditioned to avoid specific rooftops marked with subtle visual cues. A spy slipping through the back alleys might think himself unseen, but if the pigeons overhead suddenly veered away from a particular district, their unnatural flight pattern became a silent alarm for watchers below. The training process was a marvel of patience and precision. Young pigeons were raised in towers with panoramic views, their feed scattered across miniature models of Venice's rooftops. Handlers marked certain buildings with distinctive patterns, a black and white checkerboard here, a series of angled tiles there, and rewarded birds who refused to land on them. Over time, the pigeons internalized these no-fly zones so thoroughly that their avoidance became instinctive. Historical records from the Doge archives describe how officials would release flocks at dawn, then track their movements from hidden observation posts. Any deviation from expected flight paths triggered investigations, as the birds' behavior often revealed human activity that would otherwise go unnoticed, like smugglers using an abandoned attic or conspirators signaling from a supposedly vacant window. What made this system uniquely Venetian was its integration with the city's geography. The lofts themselves were architectural masterpieces, positioned at key vantage points where converging canals created natural bottlenecks. Each loft housed birds familiar with only one sector of the city, allowing handlers to pinpoint disturbances by which flocks showed unusual behavior. Modern ornithologists studying descendant pigeons have found they retain an exceptional sensitivity to geometric patterns, suggesting the Venetians selectively bred birds with this trait. Some lofts even incorporated rotating panels on their roofs. By changing the visible patterns periodically, authorities could dynamically adjust surveillance zones to follow emerging threats. The psychological impact was subtle but profound. Venetians grew up watching those pigeons wheel across the sky, unaware that their flight paths were anything but random. For those in power, the birds became living algorithms, their movements a real-time map of the city's hidden rhythms. A sudden gap in the morning's pigeon traffic over the Rialto might hint at a clandestine meeting underway, while birds clustering unusually close to the arsenal could signal unauthorized activity near the shipyards. Unlike human informants who could be bribed or coerced, the pigeons were incorruptible, their loyalty shaped by feed and habit rather than gold or threats. Perhaps the most ingenious adaptation came during times of plague. When quarantine restrictions locked down entire neighborhoods, handlers trained new flocks to avoid rooftops displaying red crosses, a system that effectively turned the pigeons into airborne quarantine monitors. Contemporary accounts tell of health officials tracking outbreaks by which sectors triggered avian detours long before symptoms appeared in the population. Today, as biologists study animal behavior for early warning systems, they're rediscovering what Venetian loft masters knew centuries ago. Sometimes the most sophisticated surveillance technology comes on wings, not wires. Under the scorching Sahel sun, where the Niger River bends like a question mark, the cities of West Africa spoke in a language without words. The talking drums of Timbuktu weren't mere instruments, they were living telegrams, their rhythms carrying secrets across the savannah faster than any horse or runner could hope to match. Picture a drummer perched atop the city's iconic mud brick towers, his hands flying over the taut goatskin surface, not to play music, but to weave intricate sonic codes. A rapid triplet followed by 2 deep thumps might signal 30 armed riders approaching from the north, while a staccato burst mimicked the gait of a specific tribal leader's horse, identifying enemies by the sound of their movement. The genius of this system lay in its linguistic precision. Unlike simple warning beats used by other cultures, Timbuktu's drummers mastered a form of acoustic mimicry so accurate they could replicate the tonal patterns of the Bambara and Songhai languages. Since many West African languages relied on pitch to distinguish meaning, the drums didn't just send generic alerts, they could speak complete sentences. Modern linguists analyzing historical accounts have identified at least 60 distinct rhythmic phrases corresponding to nouns like spear or stranger, while verb concepts were conveyed through tempo shifts. A descending series of beats might indicate retreat, while accelerating rhythms warned of imminent attack. What made the drum network revolutionary was its adaptability. Each major city along the Niger maintained its own drum vocabulary, with shared base codes but localized variations that changed seasonally. A rhythm meaning trade caravan in Timbuktu might signify slave raiders in Janneh, a deliberate obfuscation to confuse eavesdroppers. Drummers underwent years of rigorous training, not just in rhythm but in observational skills. They learned to estimate troop numbers by dust clouds and identify distant groups by the reflection of sunlight on weapons. Some historical manuscripts describe drummers using hollowed baobab trunks as natural amplifiers, their resonating chambers tuned to carry specific frequencies farther across flat terrain. The psychological impact was profound. For merchants traveling the trans-Saharan routes, the constant background of drumbeats created an eerie sense of being watched, even in apparent solitude. Raiders reportedly would cover their horses' hooves with cloth to muffle the distinctive gait patterns the drums could detect. And because the system required no visible signals like smoke or flags, it worked equally well under cover of darkness, a critical advantage when moonlit raids were common. Recent archaeological work has uncovered something astonishing. The drum platforms weren't randomly placed. They formed precise geometric alignments with natural landmarks, creating an auditory web where echoes could bounce between mesas and riverbanks to extend the drum's range. Tests with replica drums show these strategic positions could triple their effective distance, allowing messages to hopscotch from city to city with minimal degradation. One particularly clever setup near Gao used the curved facade of the Great Mosque as a parabolic reflector, beaming drumbeats toward Timbuktu with laser-like focus. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery came from studying the drums themselves. X-rays of surviving specimens reveal subtle internal chambers carved into the wood acoustic filters that dampened certain frequencies while enhancing others. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was early signal processing, allowing drummers to cut through wind or competing noise. The greatest masters could even layer multiple messages simultaneously, using different parts of the drumhead to send separate rhythms to nearby and distant listeners. Today, as satellite networks and fiber optics crisscross the globe, Timbuktu's drum towers stand as weathered sentinels of a forgotten innovation. They remind us that long before digital encryption, humanity had already cracked the code of instant communication, not with silicon and wires, but with hide and wood and the limitless ingenuity of the human ear. In those rhythmic patterns still whispered by desert winds, we hear the heartbeat of an entire civilization talking across time. In the labyrinthine streets of Mohenjo-Daro, where baked brick walls rose like canyon faces, the Indus Valley civilization engineered a psychological trap so subtle, most invaders wouldn't realize they'd been caught until it was too late. Among the city's countless doorways, some leading to bustling courtyards, others to shaded granaries, certain entrances weren't entrances at all. These false doors, identical in every visible detail to their functional counterparts, served as the world's first architectural honey traps, their very existence a test of who truly belonged in the city's carefully ordered world. The system relied on an intimate understanding of human behavior. Authentic doors showed subtle signs of use, worn thresholds, faint handprints on lintels, or the slight unevenness of hinges from constant motion. The false ones, they stood pristine, their perfect symmetry betraying nothing to the casual observer. But for trained guards watching from concealed slots in adjacent walls, these untouched portals became irresistible bait. A stranger unfamiliar with the city's rhythms might push against a false door just a heartbeat too long, his hesitation revealing his outsider status. Merchants and residents, conditioned by daily routine, would stride confidently toward known entrances without breaking rhythm. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that some false doors concealed even cleverer traps. A few were designed to emit a distinctive hollow sound when tapped, inaudible to the person testing the door, but resonating through hollow cavities in the walls to alert guards. Others had slightly recessed panels that caught the light differently at certain times of day, creating visual cues for watchers stationed on higher floors. Modern reconstructions show that the acoustics of these false doorways were engineered to amplify the sound of hands brushing against them, making unauthorized probing impossible to conceal. What made Mohenjo-Daro's system truly revolutionary was its scalability. Unlike physical barriers that required constant maintenance, the false doors became more effective over time as residents internalized their locations. Children grew up learning which routes to avoid, while newcomers, unless properly vetted, lacked this ingrained knowledge. Surviving clay tablets suggest the city rotated certain false doors seasonally, keeping potential invaders perpetually off balance. A doorway that led to a thriving marketplace one month might be bricked up and replaced with a decoy the next. Its original function shifted elsewhere. The psychological impact was profound. Knowing that any door could be a test eroded the confidence of would-be spies or thieves. Historical records from neighboring civilizations describe captured infiltrators complaining about Mohenjo-Daro's walls that lied, their frustration palpable even across millennia. The city took this further by placing some functional doors in seemingly illogical locations behind screens, or at the ends of narrow alleys, creating a spatial code that only residents could navigate fluidly. Recent excavations have revealed an even more sophisticated layer. Some false doors were actually functional, but only from the inside. A resident could exit through them into hidden passageways for emergency escapes, while outsiders attempting to enter would find them immovable. This bidirectional trickery turned the city's architecture into a living filter, distinguishing friend from foe through the simple act of movement. Laser scans of brickwork near the Great Bath show microscopic wear patterns confirming that certain doors were used almost exclusively by guards, their surfaces bearing the telltale marks of frequent, purposeful contact at specific heights. Perhaps the most striking discovery came when researchers noticed that clusters of false doors often surrounded key infrastructure granaries, administrative buildings, and the enigmatic fire altars. This wasn't random. It formed a defensive hierarchy where the most vital areas lay protected by layers of architectural deception. To reach the city's heart, an intruder would have to pass through a gauntlet of choices, each wrong turn bringing him under increased scrutiny. The Indus Valley people understood something timeless. The best security doesn't just block threats, it exposes them through their own uncertainty, letting the walls themselves separate the welcome from the unwary. Today, as urban designers study Mohenjo-Daro's layout for inspiration in crime prevention, they're not just looking at ancient bricks and mortar. They're decoding a 4,000-year-old lesson in behavioral architecture, a proof that sometimes the most powerful surveillance isn't about watching people, but about designing spaces that make people reveal themselves. In a world where we've replaced wooden doors with retinal scanners, the silent genius of those false doorways still whispers a challenge. How well do you really know the spaces you move through? In the flickering torchlight of Enyang's temple precincts, where the scent of burning bone mingled with whispered incantations, the Shang dynasty's most unlikely spies weren't living at all. They were fragments of ox scapula and tortoise shell. What appeared to outsiders as simple divination rituals were, in truth, an elaborate early warning system disguised as religion. When priests applied scorching bronze rods to these oracle bones, the resulting cracks weren't just mystical signs, they formed a coded language that allowed the ruling class to share sensitive intelligence under the sacred veil of prophecy. A zigzag fracture near the bone's edge might signify unrest in the western provinces, while a cluster of radiating lines could indicate suspicious movements along the Yellow River. The system's brilliance lay in its dual purpose. To the common people, these rituals were purely spiritual, a way to consult ancestors about harvests or marriages. But for the Shang elite, the carefully staged ceremonies became covert briefings. Before each heating, priests would inscribe the bones with seemingly innocuous questions about weather or crops. The real meaning hid in the subtext. Inquiries about storms often masked concerns about invading forces, while questions about floods could refer to refugee movements. Modern scholars examining surviving oracle bones have identified recurring crack patterns corresponding to known historical events, evidence that these markings were systematically interpreted and recorded. One particularly telling fragment from the reign of King Wu Ding shows a sequence of cracks that perfectly aligns with archaeological evidence of a border skirmish, proving these weren't random prophecies but carefully documented threat assessments. What made this surveillance method so formidable was its built-in deniability. If intercepted by enemies, the bones appeared to contain nothing but obscure spiritual musings. Only initiates understood that the priest's fingers tracing specific cracks were actually conveying troop numbers or supply routes. The system even accounted for human error. Ambiguous cracks were confirmed through multiple sessions, a process that allowed for intelligence cross-checking under the guise of religious diligence. Archaeologists have discovered pits filled with thousands of used oracle bones near royal palaces, effectively serving as the world's first classified archives. The psychological impact was equally profound. By framing security concerns as divine messages, the Shang rulers created an atmosphere where dissent felt like sacrilege. A nobleman hearing that the ancestors had revealed treachery in his region would think twice before questioning the accusation. Recent advances in 3D imaging have revealed microscopic markings on some bones, tiny notches along crack edges that may have served as memory aids for priests decoding complex threat matrices. Perhaps the most fascinating discovery came from analyzing the burn patterns themselves. Advanced thermoluminescence dating shows certain bones were reheated multiple times at precise intervals, suggesting they functioned as living documents that could be updated with new intelligence. A bone initially cracked to assess a northern threat might be reheated months later to incorporate fresh warnings, its evolving fracture map telling a story only the priesthood could read. Today, as cybersecurity experts develop steganography, hiding messages within innocuous digital files, they're echoing a technique perfected 3,000 years earlier. The Shang dynasty's oracle bones remind us that the line between surveillance and superstition has always been thinner than we think. In those blackened fragments, we see the birth of a timeless principle. Sometimes the best way to protect secrets is to hide them in plain sight, where only those who know how to look can see the truth written in the cracks. Perched on the sheer sandstone cliffs of Mesa Verde, where the air thins and the horizon stretches endlessly, the Puebloan sentinels didn't just watch, they spoke with their hands. High above the sprawling cliff dwellings, these lookouts occupied precarious ledges no wider than a man's shoulders, their bodies pressed against the rock as their fingers wove silent messages across the canyon. One raised palm might signal approaching traders from the south, while a series of rapid gestures could detail the number of armed strangers cresting the distant mesas. This wasn't mere observation, it was an intricate language of movement refined over generations, allowing warnings to travel faster than shouts could echo. The true genius of this system lay in its precision. Unlike smoke signals or drumbeats that conveyed only basic alerts, the sentinels' hand signs could communicate specifics, the color of approaching clothing revealing tribal affiliations, the presence of pack animals distinguishing traders from raiders, even the mood of strangers through their posture and gait. Archaeologists studying pottery designs and oral histories have identified at least 40 distinct gestures in this visual lexicon. A fist tapped twice against the chest meant hostile intent, while fingers spread like rays indicated peaceful but unknown. Modern trials with Pueblo descendants recreating these signals show they could transmit complex information over 3 miles with near-perfect accuracy, far beyond the range of any spoken warning. What made these cliffside watchers so formidable was their vantage point. Positioned at staggered elevations, they created overlapping fields of vision that left no blind spots in the rugged terrain. Each sentinel specialized in reading a particular slice of landscape. One might monitor the winding footpaths of Chapin Mesa, while another tracked movement across the more distant McElmo Canyon. Their perches weren't randomly chosen. The Puebloans selected rock faces that caught the morning sun at just the right angle, illuminating their gestures while keeping their faces in shadow to avoid detection. Some lookout points featured natural stone benches worn smooth by generations of watchers, with tiny cupules carved into the rock to hold signal mirrors or reflective minerals for daytime use. The system's adaptability shone brightest in emergencies. During attacks, sentinels switched to shadow signaling, using their bodies to interrupt beams of sunlight projected onto specific cliff faces. These moving patterns of light and dark formed a binary code visible only to those who knew where to look. Remnants of polished hematite discs found near key overlooks suggest some watchers amplified their signals by flashing sunlight in precise bursts, a technique that could cut through dust storms or low fog. At night, they used controlled burns in shallow clay pots, shielding the flames with their hands to create pulsed illuminations that mimicked their daytime gestures. But the most fascinating aspect wasn't the technology, it was the psychology. The mere knowledge that unseen eyes could trace a person's movements across miles of wilderness changed behavior. Traders knew to approach along prescribed routes with hands visible, while would-be raiders found themselves hesitating under the invisible weight of observation. Spanish explorers' accounts from the late 16th century describe an eerie sensation of being watched for days before reaching Pueblo settlements, though they never spotted a single sentinel. Modern experiments using the same vantage points confirm that trained observers could track human movement up to 12 miles distant under ideal conditions, a radius encompassing nearly all viable approaches to Mesa Verde. Today, as park visitors crane their necks to admire the cliff dwellings, few realize they're standing in the footprint of an ancient surveillance revolution. Those empty ledges aren't just scenic overlooks, they're the stages where ordinary hands once choreographed the safety of thousands, proving that sometimes the most powerful security system doesn't need wires or codes. Just eyes, hands, and the patience to watch the horizon until it speaks. The waters surrounding Tyre didn't just lap against its island walls, they sang with the groan of iron. When the Phoenician city lowered its legendary harbor chains, it wasn't merely dropping a physical barrier, it was turning the sea itself into a musical instrument of war. Picture these colossal links, each as thick as a man's torso, stretched taut between submerged towers. To an approaching ship, they might seem like nothing more than a dark line beneath the waves, until the current made them hum. The chains didn't just block, they broadcast. Every shift in the tide, every brush of a hull against metal sent vibrations racing toward guard posts hidden in the harbor's stone skirts, where sentries pressed their ears to bronze pipes sunk deep into the foundations. A single clink could reveal an enemy's position long before their sails crested the horizon. What made Tyre's system extraordinary was its layered deception. The chains weren't static, they could be raised or lowered in sections, creating the illusion of gaps to lure ships into kill zones. Historical accounts describe how Phoenician engineers weighted certain links to produce distinct tones when struck, effectively turning the barrier into a giant sonar array. A high-pitched ping might signal a scout vessel testing the defenses, while a deeper, resonant clang indicated a warship ramming the barrier. Modern marine archaeologists diving near Tyre's ruins have found remnants of these chains with unusual corrosion patterns, evidence they were deliberately alloyed to enhance acoustic properties. The psychological warfare was just as calculated. Merchant crews knew the chains' reputation. The mere sight of them rising from the depths could send even seasoned captains scrambling to adjust course. But the real stroke of genius was Tyre's manipulation of sound propagation underwater. By spacing the chain towers at precise intervals, the Phoenicians created harmonic nodes where vibrations amplified dramatically. A guard listening at the right spot could pinpoint an intruder's location within yards, despite the harbor's murky waters. Recent experiments with replica chains showed that their low-frequency vibrations could travel nearly a mile through water, far beyond the range of any ancient lookout's cry. Yet the system's true masterpiece was its adaptability. During storms, the chains were partially raised to allow friendly ships emergency access while still deterring attackers, the erratic clanging masked by thunder and waves. In peacetime, they became a toll gate, their rhythmic lowering and rising synced to the arrival of tax-paying traders. Some historians believe the chains even doubled as a primitive communication system. Coded sequences of strikes could relay messages across the harbor faster than a courier's boat. What lingers most hauntingly is how Tyre's chains blurred the line between architecture and instrument. They didn't just defend, they performed, transforming every ripple and current into a symphony of surveillance. Today, as modern ports experiment with underwater drones and acoustic fences, They're unknowingly echoing a 3,000-year-old innovation, proof that sometimes the most impenetrable barrier isn't the one you see, but the one you hear coming long before it stops you cold. Between the cypress trees and blooming oleanders of Crete's legendary garden labyrinths, beauty concealed a far more pragmatic purpose. These winding paths weren't just serene retreats, they were psychological gauntlets, their deceptively artful curves steering every visitor through an invisible web of surveillance. Picture walking through a paradise of cascading vines and trickling fountains, unaware that the very path beneath your feet was a masterclass in behavioral control. The garden's designers understood something profound. People will tolerate almost any restriction if it's wrapped in elegance. The system's brilliance lay in its illusion of choice. Unlike walled fortresses or gated palaces that announced their security outright, these labyrinths appeared open and inviting, yet their layout, a carefully calculated sequence of hairpin turns and false alcoves, ensured no one could reach the inner sanctums without passing predetermined observation points. Guards disguised as gardeners pruned roses near choke points, their shears pausing to note who hesitated too long at a fork in the path or whose footsteps crunched gravel in unauthorized zones. Archaeological surveys have revealed subtle terracotta pipes embedded along key routes. When blown into by sentries, they produced nearly inaudible tones that vibrated through the hedges to alert distant watchers of suspicious movement. What made Crete's gardens uniquely effective was their manipulation of human psychology. The brain instinctively seeks patterns, and the labyrinths exploited this by introducing just enough symmetry to lull visitors into complacency before disrupting their expectations. A sequence of 3 left turns might logically suggest the next should be right, but when the expected opening instead revealed another leafy wall, the momentary confusion triggered telltale reactions. Modern behavioral studies recreating these layouts found that 97% of test subjects unconsciously touched their faces or adjusted their clothing when confronted with such disruptions, physical tells that trained observers could spot from 30 paces. The true stroke of genius was the garden's adaptability. Unlike static walls or moats, the living hedges could be subtly altered. A section allowed to grow thicker here, a new path trimmed there, reshaping the surveillance web with the seasons. Historical accounts describe how visiting dignitaries would receive maps upon arrival, unaware that these guides were tailored versions funneling different groups along distinct routes. One set of paths might lead ambassadors past listening posts disguised as shaded pergolas, while another directed merchants toward alcoves where their casual conversations echoed upward to hidden galleries. Recent LiDAR scans of the Phaistos Palace complex revealed an even darker layer. Some labyrinth walls were deliberately built with irregular cavities that created selective sound channels. A whisper near a seemingly solid myrtle hedge might carry clearly to a guard's niche 20 feet away, while louder speech just steps away dissolved into botanical white noise. The gardens didn't just watch, they listened, using the very leaves and petals as acoustic filters. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery came from analyzing pollen residues in the soil. Certain plants were strategically placed for their sensory impact. Lavender near observation points to calm visitors into lowered vigilance, or rosemary where its crisp scent masked the smell of oiled weapons carried by concealed guards. Even the hypnotic flutter of silver-green olive leaves served a purpose, their dappled light making it impossible to discern motion in the shadows beyond. Walking these labyrinthine gardens today, it's easy to mistake their elegance for innocence. Yet every curve of stone, every arch of flowering jasmine was a calculated stroke in a living surveillance canvas, one that proved the most effective control isn't exerted through force, but through the gentle, inescapable guidance of a path that seems to choose for you. In these whispering green halls, Crete's rulers demonstrated a truth that still resonates. Sometimes the tightest grip wears velvet. Behind the shimmering glass facades of modern skyscrapers and the unblinking lenses of CCTV cameras, the ghostly fingerprints of ancient engineers still guide our hands. The leap from Carthage's bronze mirrors flashing across harbors to today's laser-based optical communication systems isn't just technological evolution, it's the same principle refined over millennia. Consider how the Mayans of Chichen Itza sculpted stone to catch whispers. Today, architects design buildings with parabolic surfaces that amplify sound for public safety announcements, using the very physics those ancient priests mastered. Or take Nineveh's night-prowling canines, their keen senses now replicated by seismic sensors that hear footsteps through vibrations in the ground, just as the Assyrian dogs once detected intruders by the faintest tremors in palace courtyards. The DNA of these ancient systems lives on in unexpected ways. Modern facial recognition algorithms, they're the intellectual descendants of Babylon's pigeon networks, where specific birds homed in on unique watchtowers. Today's software simply replaces feathers with pixel clusters, identifying faces as reliably as those birds spotted familiar rooftops. Even the Pentagon's seismic acoustic monitoring for underground nuclear tests owes its origins to Petra's hydraulic tripwires, where centuries once interpreted water tremors with the same precision our satellites now track subterranean disturbances. The tools have changed, but the core idea remains: convert environmental signals into actionable intelligence. Perhaps the most profound legacy lies in the psychology of surveillance. The Incas of Machu Picchu understood that visible observation points were less effective than the suggestion of being watched, a principle now embedded in everything from randomized police patrol routes to the deliberately conspicuous domes of store security cameras. Behavioral economists call this the nudge theory, but the concept was etched into Andean stone 6 centuries before behavioral science existed. Similarly, Venice's pigeon lofts, where birds' flight patterns betrayed human activity, find their echo in contemporary AI that analyzes urban traffic flows, using machine learning to spot anomalies, just as those feathered sentinels once flagged unusual movements across canals. Yet for all our technological leaps, some ancient solutions still outshine modern counterparts. The Shang dynasty's oracle bones, their cracks encoding military intelligence, were arguably more secure than today's encrypted emails, since only a handful of priests could interpret them. Compare that to digital systems constantly vulnerable to hacking. Even Tyre's singing harbor chains have a sophistication our underwater sonar arrays struggle to match. Modern navies spend millions replicating that natural acoustic amplification the Phoenicians achieved with nothing more than iron and seawater. What these civilizations grasped, and what we're still relearning, is that effective surveillance isn't about brute force monitoring. It's about harmonizing with the environment, whether that's using sunlight like Carthage, wind patterns like Angkor Wat, or the very psychology of human movement like Mohenjo-Daro. As we stand on the threshold of biometric scans and neural networks, we do well to remember that the most enduring security systems aren't those that dominate their surroundings, but those that become indistinguishable from them. The greatest tribute to these ancient innovators isn't just adopting their methods. It's recognizing that they solved problems we're still unpacking today, with elegance that often puts our digital bluntness to shame. These 25 ingenious systems shatter the myth that surveillance is a modern invention. They prove that from the moment humans built their first cities, they were already mastering the art of watching and being watched. Whether it was Carthage turning sunlight into signals or the Shang dynasty hiding military intelligence in cracked bones, these civilizations didn't just create tools, they engineered entire ecosystems of vigilance. The most striking revelation isn't just their creativity, but their profound understanding of human nature. They knew security wasn't just about physical barriers, it was about controlling perception, manipulating sound and shadow, and turning the environment itself into a co-conspirator. Take a step back and you'll notice something even more remarkable. These ancient methods still shape our world. The echoing corridors of Chichen Itza inspired modern concert halls' acoustics, while the Indus Valley's deceptive doorways find new life in today's biometric access systems. Even the humble pigeon networks of Venice have their descendants in drone surveillance fleets. The through line is clear whether you're holding a smartphone or standing in a Mesopotamian watchtower. The fundamental challenge remains the same: how to see without being seen, to listen without being heard, and to protect without stifling the very communities you're trying to safeguard. So which system leaves you awestruck? The whispering walls of Derinkuyu that turned stone into a listening device, or perhaps the hydraulic tripwires of Petra, where water itself became a spy? Drop your favorite in the comments. We'd love to hear which ancient innovation made you rethink what's possible. And if you've enjoyed this journey through history's hidden surveillance networks, don't forget to subscribe. There are countless more untold stories where these came from, and we're just getting started. Until next time, remember, the past isn't just a collection of artifacts, it's a mirror, reflecting timeless solutions to problems we're still solving today. Keep looking closer, because history's greatest lessons are often hiding in